into mind, our mind. Because whatever it contains potentially, okay, whatever it contains potentially, if it is in the sense that we're now describing, it is the way we most want to be. So whatever richness there is in such a dream, right, then we want to access that potential and allow it to emerge through the fullest participation into mind. You can see the same dynamics in relationship to body and soul as you can see in relationships all around you. All kinds of relationships. Not necessarily romance, any meaningful relationship. And through it, let's see whether this is true now, all right? Pulling to a conclusion. If there are meaningful relationships, let us say this is a meaningful relationship. Then that meaningful relationship would then provide a way of gaining access to the fullest participation into mind. Now, what's most interesting about Proclus in Plato, especially Proclus, all right? He has a word we translate as understanding. It's a Greek word, dianoia. For Proclus, he says that the activity of dianoia, which I prefer to use rather than the word understanding, and this is why. He says one must learn to exercise the dianoia. And the only way you can understand, see, the mind has several functions. One of it is to understand. It's one of its functions. So if we want to gain access to the fullest participation into mind, and if mind must include as one of its parts understanding, then what does he mean by understanding? He says, it is only through understanding relationships that you can awaken the dianoia. It's only through studying relationships that you can understand awaken the dianoia. That's an interesting thesis. Now, this is a relationship, soul to body, mind to soul. They're all relationships. If the dynamics that we need to explore to talk about the relationship of soul and mind are not any different than talking about Mani and Sarah, then we can work back and forth talking about things we're most familiar with, shift the language, and then talk about mind and soul. Because soul for the Greek, remember, is not some ethereal thing floating around above just a little bit below the ceiling. It is that within you that plans, commands, and takes care of yourself and seeks your benefit. So whatever it is, you see, within yourself that plans and commands because it cares, right? There's a part of us that cares for ourselves. There's a part of us that commands us to do certain things. Part of us that plans all kinds of things to try to bring about a better way of being. That's what the Greeks call soul. With one addition, of course, maybe a couple of other additions, but it also brings with it life, right? Source of life also. So therefore, in seeking an understanding of relationships, you have to engage yourself in the nature of the soul, because these are the three things that are involved. That presupposes there must be some mind operating behind the soul. If the soul plans and commands and seeks its own care and benefit, well then, there must be something behind it that it relies upon to make those plans, right? And that presupposes there must be mind. That presupposes we must be in touch with mind itself. Now, that means then that we can now go back to the beginning and say we can study one another, learn all we can about relationships, knowing full well that relationships that you discover is going to allow you to see things in general, which you can then apply to the realm of soul and mind, soul and body, and by doing that then you will begin to you will be forced to deal with one basic issue, which is this issue here, which is, what is the way in which we can be most what we want to be? That means being open to it, that means studying relationships, and that means now, can you treat yourself, can you relate to yourself as you do to those with whom you relate most positively, most meaningfully. Because if you do it, you're using the mind. Well, then you're appreciating the mind. Ah! Now, if that brings you to appreciate mind, and we go the next step and say, but it looked like that there was something common behind mind and soul, we can say, wait a minute then. How does the mind and soul, especially now, how does the mind and soul relate? Oh, we got a lot of information on it. I mean, we go the next step and say, how does the individual mind relate to mind itself? But didn't we not say that mind itself, and particular minds, there presupposes there is some realm of something that participates or is included called being. So therefore we can talk about, how does mind relate to being? Doesn't make any difference. Whichever things you see in a relationship, the same set of relationships that are common to all relationships could be equally binding on that. Therefore, the doorway into metaphysics is pick up the study of relationships, and what you're going to find is you can apply it in all cases. Whether you go to the highest, because behind being, let's see if we can go one more step. We touched on it once before. Let's see if we can pull it together. We found something common to mind and soul.